All right. You ready? All right, let's get
Y'all
going.
ready?
You
All right.
know?
So we're gonna have I turn it down just a little bit. We're gonna have a few more people gonna be coming in. What's unique about this is that it is solely conversation based. We just want to give a disclaimer: we are not subscribing to being the experts in this, but we do have a lot of conversations around gender and intimacy and all of those type of things. So what we would ask in this process, which we're going to go over again, but we just want people to be as engaged as possible, and there's no such thing as a wrong concept or a wrong thought. And if somebody disagrees with one another, we can kind of
agree
it's
to
okay.
disagree. It's okay. And to that point, you know, it's an open forum, so your participation is going to be what is going to help drive the conversation. You know, we're obviously a podcast and we do this often, but this is an amazing opportunity to do this with you, front and center. And so feel free to chime in, obviously doing it respectfully. And so here we go. We're saying, hey, y'all. Can y'all see our screens?
Yeah. You see our twins? So we put ourselves on the screen. That's
you
really
know,
me.
I forgot to update my Bitmoji hairstyle. But you know, shout out to my homegirl, Lana. She not on here for looking.
Yeah, we wasn't social distancing.
I wasn't quarantine ready here. It wasn't ready. But here we are.
Absolutely. And I was just sitting there like, here we go with this here.
This is really black.
Yeah,
this is such a black girl moment. And I was like, yes, it was.
You was on the floor, too.
On the floor, on pillows. It was in her crotch, getting these things done. Like, that's how it goes. Like, you know. I know you know.
It looks good, though.
Black girl magic. Thank you. So I'm Shantini, and
I am Barry, aka Coach.
AKA Coach, and we're the BaShes. Mm-hmm. We are the BaShes, and if you can tag on to our cheesy way of doing it, Shantini, Barry, BaSh. Life's a BaSh. We kind of go overboard with our
absolutely
our logo and our programming here. But yeah, so Dating My Best Friend podcast, we just get a chance to chat about like everything, love, life, trials, triumphs. It really is just an opportunity for us to talk about things that we're figuring out on the way. And through life's experiences, we just flow with it. I think having an honest, authentic conversation amongst each other, and of course with you today too, is what helps us kind of make this a really interesting component of what we do together.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, because a friend of ours, Orly, who's been Shantini's longtime friend, we would always have conversations with her. And because we have the tendency of being really candid with one another, and, you know, we kind of like remove, I guess, the relationship and the intimacy out of the discussions that we have, and we really show up as friends when we have to be truthful with one another. Orly was like, y'all should start a podcast. Yes. And we was just like, what? So, you know, taking in consideration what she said, you know, we kind of tried to explore it. At one time, we was using our cell phone in the kitchen, and it really, you know, people really kind of like brought into it, and we realized that we had something. So, you know, during this quarantine, we was like, we wanted to reactivate it because we both have like demanding occupations, and we wanted to kind of like do something together so that we could kind of like carve out dating time in a sense. So we're using this platform, Dating My Best Friend, to kind of do that, and we can still have those in-depth conversations. So today, everybody that's on,
hello,
you're welcome to Dating My Best Friend. So if you're a couple, we hope that you embody the true meaning of what it means to be dating my best friend. If you're not, you could be dating the best friend, and the dating your best friend is right in here.
You. It starts with you. Okay?
You are your best friend.
Your first best friend right here.
Absolutely.
For real. All right, so next. Okay, so just a few ground rules. First of all, like, we are here to have fun. Like, we have a lot of fun together.
Yes.
If you know us personally, you know we cut up all the time. And so
Hold on. I'm mad. I am mad at the image that you got up there. Just overruled.
But we not gonna do. That's really what that means. What we not gonna do. But yeah, so we're here to have fun. So again, your participation is so important. And we're gonna start calling you. We know you, so we're gonna start calling you. So of course you can keep your mic on if you so choose. But just make sure you're in a quiet place so it's not disruptive. And if you know it's gonna get crazy, if you got anybody in there's banging pots and pans, just turn the mic off for a second. You know, if you gotta go to the bathroom and flush, turn the mic off.
Yeah.
And again, we're gonna be talking. We want your input, and so obviously, if you're sharing, we are on a limited time frame here, so keeping it kind of like short and sweet. So if we cue the violins,
absolutely, we're gonna let you know.
Like if I do that, it's time.
Yeah.
But don't get offended because I love you. And I guess we talked about this too, like being respectful. Like, of course, we're not always going to agree on everything, but this is an open forum where we can really share ideas. And the best times where you are really like starting to come up for like to activate change and like different ideas and energies, it requires different input, right?
Absolutely.
And so being open to everyone's perspective or just different perspective is only going to expand you. Mm-hmm. And then towards the end, we're going to revisit this, but like start to think about like 2 to 3 things that stick out within the conversation, whether it be something someone said in the comments or something that kind of came up for you, just so we can kind of revisit that towards the end. And last but certainly not least, if you on here and you are not subscribed,
subscribe to our podcast right now.
To Dating My Best Friend podcast.
On Apple, iTunes, Spotify, all that good stuff. Make sure you subscribe.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Follow us on IG too.
Yes, on IG too.
We're doing the plugs now.
Exactly. All right, here we go. So, gender roles.
Gender roles. You want to give them the definition?
What are they? We'll skip to the next slide. Gender roles. So what are they? I'm just going to kind of do a quick summary. This is on your screen. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but they're basically known as like sex roles. Obviously, socially encompassing the range of behaviors and attitudes that are generally considered acceptable or appropriate or desirable for a person based on their biological, and I think this is biological and or perceived sex. I think that's an important thing to put in there too. It's usually centered around like conceptions of masculinity and femininity. And of course, we know, especially in the ever-evolving world, that there are exceptions and variations to that spectrum. And that is what we're here to talk about. And so there's this ongoing debate as to what the extent of gender roles are, how they play into your relationship dynamic, how you present yourself in the world,
how you view the world,
how you view the world. Yes. And what happens when they are socially constructed, but you're kind of almost challenged to deconstruct a lot of that. And I think that's kind of been a lot of the theme just in the Be Well experience in general. We're really deconstructing a lot of
the social norms that's been created before us.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. And I feel like, when we do this, because without realizing it, we probably already have kind of like ideas, or things that we've been through in our lives. Yeah. I'm 37, I'll be 38 in 2 weeks. So seasoned. Shout out to all my seasoned folk out there. But so we need to be as open as possible to hearing both sides. I see that, there's brothers on here and, our sisters on here, and we need to be able to be open enough to change and to new possibilities.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
With that being said, you want to go. So here's the thing. When we put the questions out, right, we don't want it to just be me and Shantini having the conversation like we said earlier. So we're going to pose questions. So it's going to be a town hall forum style, right? Because we all are experts in some right, and we all have experiences. Yeah. So you can take yourself off mute if the background is quiet, so that way, because we like laughter. Yes. We don't want to be here like we are college professors. Hello. So when we pose the question, we'll pose the question. Either I will talk, Shantini will answer it, and then we will pose it to the group. Yes. And then somebody in the group can answer the question or give their feedback on the discussion. Most of the questions, we have 6. They're all based in gender. And then as we see fit, we'll throw in another question. And here's the thing. If you have a thought or a concept or a question that you want to pose to the group, you can, you know, reflect it to us. We'll say something, and then therefore somebody else can answer.
Exactly.
Is that cool? Let me see some ones if you guys agree with that. Put some ones in the chat if you agree with it.
All right,
here we go. That's good. That's good.
Perfect. We appreciate you. All right. So first question. Do you believe that there are any gender roles that people should be taught to follow?
Are there any gender roles that people should be taught to follow? No, I don't think that there should be, because I feel like the reason why I said no is because that means that that's the very essence of conforming to another person's like idea. Now I feel like when you are a child, you need to learn your identity, but even that is as open as possible. And if somebody is like your parents, for, you know, those are the first people you interact with, if they're not giving you the space to be whatever you feel, I mean, obviously you want some level of like, I guess, you know, structure as a human, so you don't hurt yourself or you don't have to experience like pain in that kind of way. But I don't think that there's any roles that a person should be taught. I think that we should kind of like grow into them. And I mean, to me, to be honest, society as a whole have been giving us false signals for a long time. And I think that that's why we are where we are, especially as a people of color. So I don't think that there's any gender roles, to me, in my opinion.
Okay. I'm on the fence with this one. I think there's a two-part. I feel like, obviously, there's a gender that your assigned gender. And I think that it's okay as a parent to nurture in that direction, but I also think that it's important to pay attention. I think that as a people, we need to be open to it looking different than what we initially thought it would be, right? And so, like, for example, if, you know, we had a son and they're, you know, if I know, okay, in my social construct, this is a boy, these are boy things, right? And because we all fall short in that thing, because that's what we have learned to do, then I'm going to do what I know, right? And so, but I think what is also important is that as I'm doing what I know to do, if I'm paying attention to who that person is as a human being and listening to the cues that they are giving me in terms of as they're discovering their identity, then it's my responsibility to learn how that person is showing up in the world. Because essentially, like, people will teach you who they are, and paying attention, I think, is key. So I'm like on that like weird line of like, let's see, right?
Yeah,
you know?
but I feel like that. So I think about Chase, like my, you know, I daughter Chase, and when Chase was a little girl, she wanted to play with cars, and she early gravitated to a basketball, or you know, like she was a little girl, she was athletic, or she didn't want to wear skirts or dresses. And in my mind, I had to say to myself, all right, well, obviously, I guess because I have a construct on me, of course I was uncomfortable, but I'm not going to take my uncomfortability and now put it on my child, because I know it comes from a place. So I let her play with the basketball, I let her play with the cars. And then I had to ask myself, like, if I had a son and he wants to play with dolls, will I feel away? To be honest with you, because I've been programmed, yes, but I would try my absolute best not to put that on him. Now, I may roll a car in front of him, hopefully he may catch it. I'm just saying, because you can't be, I'm learning. Yes. I'm just being, listen, y'all, I'm just being honest. And not to say that it's right, but that's just the reality that we go through. But I won't impose, or I won't treat him away because of what he gravitates to or what he may like, because it comes from somewhere like that. That's just maybe who he is.
But see, I even think even in our answers, did somebody have something to say? I feel like somebody had something to share.
Oh, that's just like moving around.
Okay, I thought we heard it.
Go ahead, finish.
No, Gary, you finish your thought. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, you know, I think we've had this conversation, Jamal and I, a lot, because we are expecting parents, and just before we even knew like the sex, and it was just like, what do we do? Like you said, if your boy wants to play with Barbies, if he doesn't like cars, if he doesn't like, trucks or whatever, like there's that. I know him, he's like, oh, well, that's just not an option. But like at the end of the day, I know it's not going to change how he feels about his kid. But, we're in a society now where it's like everything is so fluid, and, what we might be teaching our kids at home is like different than what they're going to see out in the world. So you kind of have to like really think about like, what kind of parent do I want to be? Do I want to like teach them what I know, like Shantini said, and then still teach them to be open-minded at the same time, that even though this is what we're doing at home, it doesn't mean everybody else's way is wrong, and that you get to judge people, right? Because I think that's the more important thing, is like, just because this is how you are doesn't mean you get to not accept other people or judge other people or treat other people differently who may not do things the same way. So I think it's like a fine balance of just like trying to find that like that happy middle ground. I don't know.
For sure.
Yeah, I think too, to that point, Garen, and just I like to be as we like to be transparent. For the whole, it brings me to like the Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, his son's situation. So, as a man, I didn't feel a way that his son wanted to, be who he is or who she is. I think what I was, and this is me, what made me uncomfortable as a parent first was I felt like Dwayne Wade was pushing it on people. And after having a conversation with Shantini, what I realized was that was just Dwayne Wade's way of getting ahead of it as a kind of like public figure. Yeah. And I wasn't thinking of it from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
When I started to think of it, I was just like, wow, what would I have done? I probably would have went to the people who may have been like, I guess, bullying my child. And listen, I would probably do the same thing, just on, I guess, a local level. Jasmine says, gender roles depending on the era before, when employment opportunities were limited for women, it was different. Now women are making advances in their careers. Another aspect, slavery took our men away, and prison takes our men away. And then women are the everything.
Speak on it.
Absolutely.
Speak on it, Jasmine. Like, yes, that definitely brings up a topic that goes deeper, right? It definitely dives into the history of like the family, or particularly the Black family and that family construct, and how those things were sort of stripped away, right, from our men due to all of the oppression. And then as women consistently rising up to maintain a family dynamic. Girl, that just gave me goosebumps, because it's true. And so it's almost like, in that regard, are we then forced to shift the dynamics and that role? And at what point is it like there's that fine line of choice? Like, did we choose this, or is this a result of? Right? Someone says, I'm curious on how you view your own gender roles within your relationships. That's such a
so we
great
got that. So we're gonna
get into that saucy next.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, but to that too, Jasmine, and to your point, Shantini, about like the forced nature, I think that's why a lot of us, who are, adulting now, we struggle, because I guess the dynamic in our families have been deconstructed so much in a way that now our sisters or people desire to have something that was once talked about, or that was once kind of like something that, kept us together as a community, family, period. And when we get into relationships, if women are dealing with men who may come across and identify with their feminine side, or they may be what one would consider soft, it's like, you're not what I envisioned, or you're not what was told to me to be, what that type of man. So now it becomes like this kind of like degraded. And if that happens, now you have two individuals who could have built something you end up destroying the relationship. So
because of the perceived connotations of what those gender roles should be like, right? And I think to that point, and should we tackle that question?
Yeah, we should tackle that question.
You know, I say deconstruct the gender roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
you know, sometimes until it's convenient, you be like, ain't the man supposed to take out the garbage? It's like,
she keep that role.
I was like, you know, so I can't, I'm not gonna lie, I'm sometimes with my roles. I'm like, oh, we both bringing bacon and, you know, I'm not gonna be barefoot and pregnant, you know, cooking your pork chops. However, you know, you do have to take that trash out because I'm not touching that. I'm not.
She definitely does. So she definitely doesn't touch the trash. But in all honesty, to the question, you see me crazy. I'm sorry. But in all honesty, to the question, I don't think that we struggle with the gender role issue. I feel like I guess what is perceived to be the dynamic when you're dealing with gender roles with men and women. I mean, obviously, we're both heterosexual individuals in our relationship, but how we deal with each other is like, know who's gonna cook, who's gonna clean. Like sometimes I'll wake up in the morning, I cook breakfast, or at night I cook dinner. Probably more often than not. So we definitely.
That's true.
I'm the cooker in the family. When it comes to now, I will say this. And that's because I had struggles with money in the past, but I don't think it's more of a gender role. I do pride myself on being the provider in the household, but it's not from a place of like, I'm the man. It's just like, I think like I've established myself. I made it. So I want my family to be cool and be good.
And I think to that point too, like even in that gender dynamic, so having that kind of conversation about like finances for someone like me, where it's just like, that's okay, like you good, you know, like but I think just even in your past relationship, you can even talk about this, like your past relationship, when we've talked about this, how that was perceived and constructed. And so when you're with somebody who that value as a person, as a man, has been associated with, the man does this, and in your past or in your history may have fallen short in terms of the other, what their expectations were. So you've come into the dynamic surprise when I'm just like, you good. Like this is we like,
got this.
We ebb and flow. And so understanding I think your partner's history, I think, is also important because, you know, there's parts of me that still tries to maintain some traditional ways of that kind of gender role structure, and in other parts where it's not. But I think what it boils down to is having a conversation and communication, so that you understand some of what your partner's ideologies on these constructs are.
Because Shantini put the light bulbs in the bathroom. Like
I sure do. I am every piece of furniture up in here.
Like, I'm not the handy. Like I try. Once it fall apart, that's it. I only got one screw. That's it.
You ain't even change. You don't change the light bulb. But again, right? I think that talks about, and even in this conversation, as we're talking about those different pieces, it really does bring up the question of who said that was a man thing to do. Who said that? Right? But like here we are kind of falling into those roles. But I think having these dialogues and open conversation about these topics is where we can really start to check ourselves, check the language that we're using and how we're dealing with each other, so that we be able to communicate with each other and say, you know what, it's cool that you don't change your life, because I don't mind. I like it. You know? Like I will scrub a toilet. He will not. Like the dishes, he's okay with them, you know. So like all of those things,
I think that's what makes us. I think that's what makes us work. We don't conform to any set way. We just whatever we need to tackle. If she's the expert or if she's good at it, no matter what it is, she takes the lead. If I'm good at it, I take the lead. Let's get to some more questions.
I think that within, what did we miss? I missed something.
This one from
so it says, I think it's important to come from a place of exploration. Yes, as gender continues to evolve and fluid. Yes, absolutely. I think, and I want to kind of touch on something you said earlier about being soft. I'm such an advocate of the word soft. You know, when I think that as when you associate a man specifically as like soft or that kind of energy that is usually like seen as weak or, you know, disadvantaged, like you're in a disadvantaged position, when it's just like there is a beauty, so much beauty in like that delicateness of a person, man, women, whatever, however you identify, like non-binary, whatever your identity, your gender identity is, like there's such an amazing like delicacy to who you are as a human being when you identify as soft. Like that's gorgeous, you know, like especially like men being vulnerable. I tell them all the time, like vulnerability is sexy.
And we have to give space for it too. Because you know we have, and I think it's ironic in the earlier session that I had somebody brought that up, like when we're told to man up, like you know that idea just comes from parents who don't want to take the time to console their children, and even when you talk about gender, when men or women identify, I guess, with more masculine ways, or a man identifies with a more feminine way, that doesn't mean that's just what he identifies with. You know, it's not the totality of who they are, and it should not, in my opinion, and anybody could disagree, and we can have dialogue, but it should not dictate how that person is treated, and how that person decides that they want to navigate in relationships. If a man wants to be in relationship with another man with the same sex, that doesn't make him less of a man. Like even if you look at like old medieval movies, some of your greatest warriors were men who were in homosexual relationships. It doesn't matter, and they will chop your head off. So you know, like, so if we want to consider the brute to be the man or the most masculine, I feel like we got to really change the way we think. People pouring in.
Yeah, let me just go. We need to go back.
I wish I would say some of these things.
And the other thing too is just like we have to also like this is gender roles, like gender and sexuality are completely different things, and so like that's
but sometimes
just
people oftentimes mix the two, and it's unfair.
Yes. Okay. So who says, I think that within the confines of your relationship, the couple should define what roles they take on. Playing to one another's strength, yes, can only strengthen relationships. So someone says, I'm better at managing the finances than my husband, and I like to do the yard work, you know, and supposedly right, traditional male roles. Yes, that's amazing, right? Yeah. Like, good, golden. Who was that? I hear someone chiming in. Who said
that was me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Alyssa.
So I've been married 23 years plus. We have a son and a daughter, and our daughter is much more bold and outspoken than our son. Our son has such a soft heart, but that doesn't mean that he's weak because of it. And so, you know, you look at who your children are going to be, and you support that. I mean, my daughter is also really soft-hearted, but she holds a lot of things close to the vest. So, you know, when it comes to parenting, the couple who's expecting a child, you know, you never know what kind of personality they'll have. And as parents, you support that. You know, you support them in their journey to becoming whoever they are.
Yeah.
To becoming
whoever.
That's powerful, right? Like, because, and here's what I learned. You know, my son is 22. He's in the military. My daughter will be 13, going on 30. And what I realized,
my daughter's 7.5.
And what I realized in their dynamic is no matter how much, as human beings, even if you're mentoring younger people, or people, if you're in a position with people, their journey is their journey.
Yeah.
So if you decide to have a child, or if you've been raised in a situation where people always try to dictate what your life is going to be, I remove yourself, because no matter how much we say that we're going to guide our children, their story is their story,
and they guide us.
And absolutely,
guide us. I have this quote on the wall in here that talks about, you know, a lot of the times the journey is mostly about unbecoming everything that's not you, you know. And so I think even in this conversation, that's a charge for us to like unbecome some of the things that we were taught that don't work anymore.
Absolutely.
You know, didn't really work for us then, but like don't work right now, because I don't know about you, but like I know a lot of people who may not necessarily want their parents' relationship.
Mm-hmm,
you know, and so like being okay with redefining what that looks like for you, and keep those other voices and those opinions out, because to your point about making sure it's a conversation and something that you have decided works for you and your dynamic with the person that you're trying to build with. And if you're not building with anybody yet, like be clear about what that looks like for what you want, right? And who you desire in a partner. And that starts within you. So like, how do you define yourself and the roles that you bring into the table? Like, so that you are clear when you go into a situation, if that's something that you're interested in.
Absolutely. Y'all hitting us with these questions.
Yes,
so
I love it.
Joanna says that it's about partnerships, and it's about the individual more so than the man or woman. Absolutely. Yes. So it's like, and we actually had a shameless plug. We had a conversation on our podcast that you should go subscribe to Apple, iTunes, or Spotify.
Say to my best friend.
And we talked about being whole.
Yes.
And I think that kind of speaks to what Joanna and Ben, shout out to Joanna and Ben, we see you, but that's kind of that speaks to it. It's like sometimes we go into things half, and because we don't know the totality of our own identity, then we come with these social constructs, and it forces us to kind of like butt heads in our relationships. So you have to be a full individual when you are trying to cohabitate and commingle with somebody else and fully understand who you are.
It's a misunderstanding that men have a feminine energy as well. Like, yes, like
I was just crying this morning.
Sure were.
On the toilet bar, I was looking at what was that? America's Got Talent.
Yes.
And this guy was in prison for 37 years, wrongfully convicted.
Accused.
And he was singing, and Shantini walked in the bathroom on the toilet bowl, cried.
And I was just like, what happened? You all right? And he was like, no, I was just touched by this person's story. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so beautiful.
Broke my heart.
You know, and so to the women in the room who are in a dynamic with a man, you have to give space for that.
Everybody else would be like,
right? I mean, like, you know, like my mind is, if I was a different person, I said, man up, what you crying for? You know, when it's just like, no, it's okay to give that person space. And to that point of that, there's both. We all both have that feminine and masculine energy, and it's a spectrum where you lie, and giving room for those moments that may evoke what's quote unquote a more feminine energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what are we saying in that?
Right.
Like, are we saying that feminine energy is weak when it's not?
Right.
I think that is also a misconception, and I always teach men that I work with. It's like, yo, what do you mean when you separate the two identities? That means that you are kind of like we're putting ourselves on a higher threshold as our sisters. So it's like, nah, you know, like I think that even feminine and masculine, that social constructs really degrade one another. It's just like we're humans. We're humans first. Now, biologically, you're a female and I am a male, but we shouldn't allow that to equate how we behave towards one another or how we think about our constructs when we, live together.
Go ahead.
All right. So one thing I just wanted to mention is that, even though, yes, I think a lot of the social construct comes from like the feminine energy and society basically saying women are less than, but I think we're ignoring one really important thing especially for like Black men, is that for a lot of Black men, it's not the fear of being associated with feminine energy because women are less than, but it's also because feminine energy somehow is linked to homosexuality. So therefore one must equal the other. And that fear or that, phobia is then like intensified. So it's like any sign that you could potentially have some feminine energy in you must equal you being a homosexual. So therefore, if you want to avoid that, or if you're trying to make it clear that you're heterosexual, then there's only one way to do it. And that's by being manly and by making sure you stick within these like confines, because as a society, like as a community, we sort of like, made it so that they have no choice, right? Because we've rejected, that concept. So in so many different ways, so Black men are forced to kind of like pass that on, and they pass that on to their kid because of a fear of, again, somebody will think you're this, so I need to make sure you behave in this way so that everyone knows that you are heterosexual.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like they're like you are proving.
Yes.
Kind of like always prove yourself against this societal construct.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's heavy. Like
it is
so heavy.
I think also too, Garen, I guess you can go through. Also too, when you look at the contract, especially like in the 60s and the 70s, and in the early 80s, crack first powder, when they really was like ripping our families together, I don't even think it was taught. I think that what happens is that for those of us who didn't grow up with a father, or that figure wasn't in our household, now we had to learn and navigate. So it wasn't even about masculinity or femininity. It was about survival. So if I'm outside and I'm playing and I'm with my friends, and one of them, because they're angry, slap me in my face, now I have to defend myself, and then I grow up with this aggressive nature. There's nobody there because now my mom has to wear two hats, or I am like raising myself because she's working a 12 to 12 because it's an imbalance in the structure. Now I grow up and all of my friends grow up, and now we grow up with this level of toxic aggression.
Yeah.
And then the media gives us, to your point, all of these images of what a white picket fence and the American dream looks like. And it's so distorted that when we enter into relationships, we're not equipped to even know how to deal with it. And then for our women, you were raised by a woman who had to be independent, or had to be strong, or had to be the man and the woman in this construct. So now you got a man who is dependent on your love. You have built this level of independence, and if he shows emotions, it's a trigger for you because you've never seen it, and now we're dealing with messed up relationships. So it's definitely like we have to identify who and what we are and the things that we want in life.
Exactly. And I think just like making sure that you take the time to be clear on that, right? Because like we all have that history. We all have similar stories in that regard. And like once you identify it and work towards it, I think there's a key part, because like you can know all you want, right? Be like, oh, well, this is just how I am. This is just how I've raised. And like challenge yourself to deconstruct those ideas, because then it just opens up a world of possibility for you and your relationship and the future of our generations to come. Because it like Ayana said earlier, like it's fluid. There's things that are just, life is just so much more fluid now. And I think when you think about it, it really just opens up a world of possibilities that it's endless.
I think Ayana asked a question that I guess we could pose to each other and to the group. Regular cycles and creating something new, we definitely have to unlearn beliefs. So I guess the question is, now what we can ask is like, okay, then we talked about so many different effects, or like where it came from. How do we think? What do we do? Like how can we break what we have been taught? How do we unlearn and create new legacies? So
I would say, again, to that point, like just going beyond what right? Like challenging yourself for the betterment of the people and the futures of the people and our kids that are going to come after us. Challenge yourself to not stay stagnant in this is just how I know to do it. This is just what I'm going to do. And to kind of offer some like tools towards that, right? Like there's always like therapy. There's sessions like this and these Be Well conversations where you can start to put those things out in the open so that they are addressed, and you give space to talk about what it is, how you've been showing up, and whether or not it is or is not serving you. And if it's not serving, then how do we pivot? How do we start to create change and impact? And I really think it starts with you and your language. I really believe in like the power of your words and the things that you say. And so even in I identified a lot in this conversation, like even in our conversation, we're talking about, oh, I should clean this and I should clean that, because like just by default, we are living in this construct. So like, how do we just shift the language?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I feel like what I do and what I've been doing for the last couple of years is like giving space for everybody. So, I've been taught heterosexual man, grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. Back in the day, you see a man who presented and he may be gay. It was like you either wanted to crack jokes on him, you didn't want to associate. But as I matured and especially doing transformational work, I realized that that's a fear. That's a form of xenophobia. And now I give space and I love everybody. So, and it's funny because we went through a transformational training together, and there were a lot of men who identified with homosexuality. And those are probably I hugged the most men in my life. And I was just like, after, and it's something that simple. After that, I was just like, damn, like how traumatized was I by this misunderstanding that I isolated myself from great other individuals or great human beings. So I feel like after that process, it has opened my world up. And now I have brothers who identify differently than I do, but we still able to build, we still able to create programs together and things like that. So I feel like that is definitely a way. Like if you don't know, don't pass judgment.
Right.
And if you don't know, go get some understanding.
Curious. Yeah, I think it's okay to be curious.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid, because that's being, like about the gender role. So, I tell my children that God gave all of us the tear ducts. It's a misconception that men can't or shouldn't cry.
That's right. And I think that's where it starts, Alyssa. So Alyssa said, I'm just going to read it again. I tell my children that God gave us all tear ducts. It's a misconception that men don't or can't and shouldn't cry. And I think that's, again, we're talking about like change and creating change in our family dynamic. I guess it starts with you, like being that message and that person to create space and open up the world for your children, the world for the people that are around you. If you're mentoring people, like being okay and accepting people for who they are. One of the things I always say, and this kind of ties into like, love language, so to speak, but it's like, if you pay attention to who the people are in front of you and how they communicate their love, their identity, the things that move them. If you say you care about a person, learn them.
Absolutely.
Learn them.
And if you're afraid of the person, learn them. Right? Like our greatest enemy.
Yes.
The person who created the social construct, the reason why they were able to do it is because they took time to understand. They understood our culture and our
greatness.
They understood our music. Yes. They understand our family dynamic. Yes. They understood everything about us.
Exactly.
And then they took us.
And then they deconstructed. They were like, we're gonna
absolutely.
Together,
and when they got us, they knew then, right? When you talk about the codes, the black codes, or how to break people of color, right? It starts from there. And even if you're not a person of color, there's still social constructs that you grew up in, especially for white and Caucasian people. It's like that dynamic of man and wife is super prevalent. So it's just like, we just have to be willing to move our egos and our fears aside, because those two things will stop us from possibility and prospering. NA, shout out to NA. I think we're gonna end. We gotta end like in 3 minutes.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left.
You guys can answer like one or two more questions.
Okay.
All right, cool.
All right. So we're just gonna read a couple of comments. You want to take that one?
Well, I think it's mental maturity, and once we have that as parents, adults, we can share that with our kids and create a more living and accepting humans. Yep.
That's right.
Absolutely. That's what I kind of do with Chase. I raise her as a human. That's something that we talk about all the time. It's not a parent to child dynamic. We already know that exists because we brought her here, like we're older than her. All right, those things exist. But when she sits with us or she has questions, we have conversations and we give her space to push back. We give her space to question. Obviously, if it's, we see it,
framework.
If it get a little too crazy, go to your room. No, I'm just joking. But we try our best to allow her to navigate and fail and experience. In fact, and this is the last point, she's getting ready to go to high school. And through this whole COVID, it was a high school that at first We were like, hell no. We got all type of people in this school. We don't want you to go there. You're going to go to Bedford Academy with all the black kids. It's a black school. And it didn't pan out. So the other day, literally just happened. I decided, I was like, you know what? Let me go on the Zoom parent-teacher, the 9th grade parent-teacher thing. And as I started going through it and I started seeing the diversity and all of the different people and all of the different kids that she was going to be around, and they got a swimming pool in the school, I was just like, damn, we were trying to disassociate her from the world, right? Because the world is made of absolutely of our own fears, and we're super conscious, but that showed up again, the social construct. Oh, you don't want to be around white people, you don't want to be around Hispanic people, and we have to stop that. So now she's going to the school. So this is the whole world. Absolutely.
Yes. Just a few more comments. Consistently challenge yourself to step outside the box and do something different. Yes, that's a good word right there. I think it's mental. We talked about that one already. Loving. Thank you for sharing. Thank you guys for sharing.
We had to rush through this for 45 minutes. Can we see
your faces for
2 seconds? Can we see some of y'all faces? You got beautiful names.
Let's just do a face reveal real
quick, and I'm gonna look.
Shout out to all your beautiful names.
All your beautiful
names,
faces. Erica, Denise, BJ.
Come on, stop being scared. Hey,
N-A-N-A.
That's Olana. What's up, sis?
Hi, Ola. Erica, thank you guys for showing your faces and spending this time with us. I just want to read one last comment. To overcome what was internalized. Yes, I started to speak my truth. I started to practice in a supportive environment. Yes. Find your tribe, like find your people, right? Because when you align yourself with like-minded people to help push this forward, that's how you start to invoke change. Yes, thank you guys so much for being here with us. We appreciate you. Please be sure to follow us.
Yes.
And we're at I think I have it somewhere. We're going to flip the slide. But follow us at the BaShes. It's __BaShes on Instagram. And subscribe to our podcast, Dating My Best Friend podcast.
Did y'all see that picture? Did y'all
see the picture? See, it's okay if you're on the phone.
Thank you, Barry and Shantini. This was a great.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone, for sticking in here with us. We are in the second half of the entire Be Well experience, and we have 2 more sessions coming up at 3 and 4. And so if you are registered for 3 o'clock, that will be our community wellness, one about building a community and what that looks like on social media. So re-envisioning what your Wakanda means to you. And then the other one is just a good old black ass good time of playing. So thank you guys for joining in, and hopefully I will see everyone else in one of the next 2 sessions. Be well.
We love y'all. We love y'all. Thank you. Don't get home safe because you're already safe and you're at home.